Welcome to Rising. Thank you for joining us on Monday. Briahna Joy Gray, hello, how are you?
Hello, Robby Soave. I guess I don't know your middle name.
Well, I'm not gonna. It's kind of an embarrassing one. I'm not gonna share it. I'll leave the sleuths in the comment section to go find it.
Someone should make this their Ask Me Anything question for the weekend.
Oh, and then I'll have to reveal it. Yeah. Okay. I was gonna comment on our wardrobe choices. We're both going with the blue and the red.
Yes, I always love it when we align. When we have simpatico as we are getting dressed in the morning. Suggested maybe we will have simpatico here today on the show.
I think we might on this subject at least. We'll see when we get to the updates in the Israel-Palestine conflict, how that shakes out. But let's talk about this subject.
Yeah, well, we have a new bombshell report on the 2022 destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. They found a senior Ukrainian military officer with deep ties to the country's intelligence services played a central role in the bombing. This is according to the Washington Post. Per the Post, Roman Chervinsky, a decorated 48-year-old colonel who served in Ukraine's Special Operations Forces, was the coordinator of the Nord Stream operation. People familiar with his role said managing logistics and support for a 6-person team that rented a sailboat under false identities and used deep-sea diving equipment to place explosive charges on the gas pipelines. As pointed out by the Daily Wire's Greg Rhee, it took the Washington Post a year to admit that Tucker Carlson was right about Nord Stream. A year ago, the Post published analysis on Tucker Carlson's, quote, shoddy case linking the U.S. to alleged Nord Stream sabotage. Then 6 months ago, they reported that the U.S. had intelligence of detailed Ukrainian plans to attack Nord Stream pipeline. The Gray Zone's Aaron Mate weighed in on the Washington Post Nord Stream arc, tweeting, quote, your first clue that the Washington Post new Nord Stream scoop is yet another CIA cover story is in the second graph. U.S. and Western officials have called the Nord Stream bombings a dangerous attack on Europe's energy infrastructure. No top U.S. officials, namely Blinken and Nuland, have openly celebrated the Nord Stream bombings as a tremendous strategic opportunity that they're very gratified by. Meanwhile, contributing editor at Unheard, Mary Harrington, added on the story's timing, it's official, Ukraine is no longer the current thing.
Earlier this year, we spoke to veteran journalist Seymour Hersh about his exclusive reporting. The President Biden personally ordered the destruction of Nord Stream. Here he is defending that reporting.
I've been in this business with sources like this for 50 years. When I first did BeLi, there was, overwhelmingly disapproval of what I wrote, and most of the stories I wrote that were controversial has always been attacked on the. It's easy to get rid of something on the basis of anonymity, and so you have to understand there's no alternatives. Either the people I've known inside have one thing in common, and whether military or civilian. And that is, they really understand that they've taken their oath of office not to their boss, not to the general or admiral, and not to the president, but to the Constitution. And those are people that, when they get troubled by things that are going on, have talked to me. And this been going on. I've done this for 50 years.
All right, so what do you make of this story? Aaron Mate, as we just read, is continuing to express some skepticism that this is the full extent of it, pointing out that the story seems to take at face value the idea that the West was devastated by this explosion, when we have on record a number of U.S. officials saying that it was strategically advantageous for the United States. Do you think this is the full story, or do you agree with what Aaron Mate seems to be alluding to here, which is that there's more and perhaps more implications of the U.S. government in this? Well,
I mean, like Seymour Hersh's version of events, this version of events, other version of events, I can't read the direct intelligence, right? You're relying on some narrator, some mediator to say, I saw documents, I talked to people, and this is my analysis. That was true of Seymour Hersh, who's a great journalist, but he was telling us things that he had seen and heard, not documents we could review ourselves. That's the same case with the Washington Post. I think the original narrative about what happened, remember, the original narrative about Nord Stream was that Russia did it. That's what the mainstream media eagerly asserted without evidence or much motive to do it. Yeah. So that seems to have totally collapsed. Seymour Hersh's report squarely blames the U.S., says Biden was personally responsible, said it was U.S. Navy SEALs diving team that trained in the U.S. to do this mission. The Washington Post is saying, no, it was Roman Chervinsky, this kind of rogue Ukrainian operative who's actually in prison right now. He was arrested for launching some kind of operation that he did not have authority to do. So given that. So that is true. So they arrested him for that. That was sourced. So now they're now saying he did this too. I just don't understand. If it is still somehow the U.S. did it, why would Ukrainian officials be taking and we're about to cut them off of support anyway? Why would Ukraine be like falling on its sword and taking the blame for this?
Because as long as it's someone random, rogue, unaffiliated, and not attached to a foreign national, including not attached to Ukraine, then they can escape national liability for destroying a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project that Germany and other European powers had spent a lot of money on and were relying on. It took significant both political and economic hits from having to source gas from elsewhere and have to tell their constituents why it was that they were having to pay more at the gas pump or to fuel their houses over the winter. So as long as it's just a guy, then they are basically absolved of any personal liability.
Well, I mean, it's not just a guy. It is that this would have been organized not by Zelensky himself, according to the Washington Post, but the most senior military figure, Zelensky, that he would have been the person involved. So that does go pretty directly to the top. Look, I think
a downstream fall guy versus the top of your government.
I mean,
that's done with consensus.
Well, it's the top of the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian government is very much impugned by this.
Right, no, but the problem is, even if it's the top of the Ukrainian government, if it's literally Zelensky, first of all, the idea that Zelensky was going to do or sanction anything without the support of the United States on whom it was entirely and continues to be entirely reliant to be able to fund this war is unlikely. So I think there's two. Well,
what do you mean? I don't know if it's unlikely. I think it's I think it is, in fact, the most likely thing at this point.
So these are the two scenarios. Either you have it, you did this with the U.S.'s consent and complicity. You did it together, and neither of you want your hands dirty, and if one goes down, the other goes down, so everyone's looking for a fall guy downstream. Or alternatively, Ukraine sanctions it without the U.S.'s approval and needs to not be tagged with it personally, is able to put it on a downstream fall guy. I'm not saying I know that obviously either of those things happen, but those are the scenarios that people are playing out in their head. Either way, everyone is benefited. Every national government is benefited from not being personally responsible for what was an act of terrorism on allied infrastructure. Nobody is ever going to want to claim national responsibility for an act of terrorism on allied infrastructure.
Yeah, it just, at this point, it seems like the bulk of what is known is favoring that Ukraine did it, which seemed most likely to be from the beginning, because they're the ones being invaded. They're the ones that can take a risk or take a gamble, and it seems like less of a big deal to them.
But Robby, again, I think the question is, did Ukraine do it acting solo, or are they doing it acting with the backing of the United States? And remember, part of what casts such suspicion over various narratives that have come out over the course of the last year plus is the fact that there have been calls for independent investigations in the UN Security Council that got shut down by the United States and, with veto power in the UN Security Council. Russia, China, other nations said, let's just have an independent UN investigation. They said no. So again, there is this question of who has the motive here to not want to get to the bottom of who was the actor in the situation. Yeah. That is the sort of circumstantial evidence that's causing folks, I think, like Aaron, to continue to be skeptical.
Well, and I would like to see, I wish I could evaluate myself the documents that Seymour Hersh claimed to have for equipment being purchased, purchase order documents about the training they were doing, because it was a very specific allegation that he made that it was organized by U.S. Navy SEALs diving team in in Florida or somewhere in the coastal United States.
Yeah.
And I would like to see more to support that. Obviously, it's perfectly possible that it's true. I wouldn't put it past the United States at all, but also the narrative that Ukraine did this and why they would have did this and this figure's involvement specifically also does not require a lot of additional explanation at this point. And maybe it is as simple as the butler did it.
I mean, one other thing that was notable and I think persuasive about Seymour Hersh's reporting was pointing out that there are very few people who are trained in the first place to be able to carry off this kind of very technically sophisticated operation. Remember, there was a story some months ago about a boat that was found on the shore with this amount of residue on it, that they were saying this is the boat that was used in the bombing attack, where experts are like, okay, well, this boat is not big enough to hold the number of explosives. Who was trained to actually be able to do this? This is the kind of operation that you wouldn't necessarily imagine was done on that kind of a small scale. So to me, I would also continue to want to know what diving training has this individual had? Is it possible for one or 6 individuals in this case, a team of this size, to have actually carried this out? Were the other people on this alleged team actually trained in the ways that
what is described in this article is similar to what the account was, but just that it was not done in the U.S.
Yeah.
That a sailboat was rented, and they used deep sea diving equipment to attach explosives to the pipeline. So it's a similar. The what of it is similar.
Yeah, but the question of Soave's point was that there were only a handful of people in the world that were trained. I think he said some Scandinavians and some Americans. And that there were a certain number of facilities where people learned this kind of training. And that you should be able to basically trace back who could possibly be implicated to those points of training. I know other analysts of the war effort have said, I don't have any expertise here and can't individually evaluate this myself, but have said that Ukraine's military capabilities were beyond what might have been expected. They were able to carry out some bombings even within Russia, those kinds of things. It is more technically impressive, and this would be in keeping with that. I don't know. I guess I'm also reflecting on just a few months after OceanGate, seeing a multi-millionaire, billionaire, I can't remember now, that his hubris led those people in that submergible to such a disastrous end. I mean, going deep underwater is a very, very serious undertaking that requires not just bravery or even individual personal skill, but a lot of technical know-how. And so I would expect to see that fleshed out going forward if this guy really is the person involved in the story.
Well, tell us what you think in the comments. Let us know if you're persuaded by this new reporting, and we'd love to get Seymour Hersh on again to react to what we've learned here. More Rising right after this.